Most of us can agree that at some point, Florida State is going to find a way out or settle their way out of the ACC. The ACC might even agree with that. So why is the ACC fighting this tooth and nail?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On yesterday's episode, we reacted to the ruling by Judge Cooper in Leon County, Florida, to deny the ACC's motion to stay. At some point, we may reach the discovery phase. We'll talk about that. So for right now, the battles rage on not only in Florida courts, but in North Carolina courts as well. And then for the ACC, also in South Carolina against Clemson. We get a question or a YouTube comment on yesterday's episode from Aaron, who says, hey, what is the end goal for the ACC here? FSU only has to win on 1 point for their suit to be a success. Why risk this, he says. The Florida judge basically told you he's not buying the ACC argument. ACC should let them go and split the TV money. So I think, Kenton, because so much of the coverage on this issue has been, I'm not going to say like favoring Florida State, but a very one-sided. I've been following a lot of great people in Tallahassee who have been covering this, and we're covering the hearing on Tuesday in Florida. I have seen this question raised, Kenton, like what's the end game? There's a few points that are pretty obvious to me, but I'd like your take first. What's the end game for the ACC and why are they fighting this?
This reminds me of when people would ask me, how was Anna Nicole Smith married to that really old guy? It's like she's one of the hottest women in America. Why is she married to him? Well, I can name a few billion reasons why. And in this situation, I can name a few 100 million reasons why. Stick with me here. If we're following the logic, why is the ACC fighting so hard here? Florida State only has to win one thing. That is true. Florida State also could lose that one thing. And then what? And then what, right? Like at this point, this has reached a point where the ACC knows if they were to give a cheap buyout to Florida State, and Clemson can afford that buyout as well. Your top two players, your two top dogs have taken the buyout. They're gone. What is ESPN's motivator to say, we want to renew in 2026.
Right.
I believe that's when it's up, right? 2026.
Yeah, I know that the renewal kicks in 2027. So I think 2026 is probably when they have to agree to that.
Yeah. So if they are to have any shot at renewal happening, we have to stop looking at this as like the domino that's right in front of us. There are layers of dominoes that each one, as these things drop, they knock over something else. If you throw a rock in a pond, the ripples spread beyond where the rock hits. That's what we have to pay attention to with this case. It's not just fighting because the ACC likes Florida State that much. The ACC is a conference, is an entity. It's a business entity just like any other. Just like any other. If Arizona T could make $1 billion tomorrow by turning to weapons manufacturing, you think they'd leave T alone? Of course. But it just doesn't work that way, right? So what we're looking at is the ACC knows it is more lucrative to fight this tooth and nail. And if you win, you end up in a situation where both Clemson and Florida State have to stick around through renewal. Do they have to be here forever? No. Donno and I have said this plenty of times, which is why I don't get, again, why people keep saying, oh, you all just want the ACC to stay together forever. We know the relationships are torn beyond repair.
Yes.
I don't care one way or another what happens here. But what I know for a fact is that if the ACC decided, oh, this is such a long and dreary fight, let's just give up and let's just let them pay the 130 and let's just say another 60 or so to make it or 70 to make it a clean 200 million and go on about your way, as opposed to saying, no, those TV rights are worth $500 million darn near, or 400 million. And y'all are going to have to pay us every cent to come up off of those. If they were to go that first route, that then puts them in a bad situation for the renewal. When they're in a bad situation for renewal, they're in a bad situation for anybody to come back. Now it's a whole different ballgame. So that's what the ACC is working so hard for, in my opinion. It's not just the 400 million reasons, or really 800 million reasons, because there's 2 lawsuits now. It's also every dime that's coming behind every university at this point. Because without renewal, who's to guarantee the ACC remains?
Exactly. It's survival. I mean, protecting their grant of rights, it's an existential crisis, because if that gets invalidated and broken, then theoretically the floodgates could open, and it puts you, like you said, in a terrible position for your next TV deal, which the ACC doesn't want. And another thing, like, I feel like, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but I think at some point there's going to be some form of a settlement that involves Florida State buying their way out of the ACC, including buying their TV rights. And it's going to be a number probably somewhere between what Florida State is asking for, which is 0, and what the ACC is asking for, which is what, total of the 400, 500 million range. Now, a lot of times people look at this stuff very like black and white in terms of winning, losing versus settling, whereas, hey, winning is a W, losing is an L, and settling is a tie. No, there's different degrees of settlement, Kenton. And even if the ACC realize at some point there might be mediation and a settlement, you want to settle from a position of strength, not from a position of weakness. And if the ACC can get some court wins, it puts them in a better position to demand more from Florida State on the way out. I think that's important. Now, with that said, the more and more I study and try to understand Florida State's their victory, I'll call it a victory. It's a battle won, not a war won. Their victory in court against the ACC on Tuesday, it was significant because Judge Cooper, he made it very clear that he felt, even though the ACC filed suit first, they got out first in North Carolina. And oftentimes, this is what the ACC was hoping for. Oftentimes, the side that files first ends up getting favored. There is some precedent for that. So I felt like the ACC pulled like a Harvey Specter from Suits move that, hey, they want to sue us. We're going to sue them first and get out in front of it. Clever, but unfortunately, the judge in Florida saw through that. He felt that the ACC, that there's enough of a sentiment in his mind that the ACC rushed their filing in order to beat Florida State by literally one day, deliberately filing in friendly territory for the ACC in their home state of North Carolina in order to go, the term that he kept using was forum shopping. He used that throughout the process. Now, he did not agree to the ACC's assertion that the case in Florida should halt temporarily while the case in North Carolina moves forward, because Kenton, had the case been halted in Florida, that would give the ACC the opportunity to hope for a favorable ruling first in North Carolina that could then influence or set a precedent for how things play out in Florida. The judge, though, in Florida seemed to disagree with the idea that a judge in North Carolina should influence his own rulings in the Sunshine State, because another part of what makes this whole process so complicated is the laws are different in North Carolina. They're different in Florida. They're different in South Carolina, where Clemson is filing suit. So I guess there is a chance, and this may end up going through federal courts at some point, Kenton. There is a chance that the ACC could get the ruling that they like ultimately in North Carolina, with Florida State getting a ruling they like in Florida, and somebody's got to mediate that and break that tie. Now, another point that I want to bring up on all this, Kenton, is that when we're talking about these motions to stay and motions to dismiss, they haven't actually reviewed the evidence yet, right? At this point, they haven't gone through discovery. They haven't gone through. So they basically have to take both sides at their word when they come to these preliminary rulings. So we're only at the tip of the iceberg. If these cases keep moving forward, if they don't settle first, there's going to be a lot of nastiness out there. And I'm just going to get my popcorn ready.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to tell you this. I don't foresee a settlement coming anytime soon because when you look at who would want a settlement, right? And not only who would want a settlement, but when you also look at who has the ability or who is hurt or helped the most by staying throughout this, staying the course and saying, you know what, even if I lose over the course of 3 years, that's better than letting you have a settlement in a year and a half. The ACC is the
Yeah,
party that would want to do that.
that's a great
They're the
point.
party.
Yeah. And
They're the
this is
party.
going to be expensive for both sides. I don't know who's got the bigger war chest because obviously you're going to be paying legal fees for the next 3 or so years if it plays out that way. But yeah, it's going to become a war of attrition.
And I'm going to tell you this much: you have a war of attrition between one or two parties that each have one student body, one board of trustees, one pretty much their booster clubs, and all that feeding them, versus an entity that has 12 other teams. That number is about to grow in
Yeah,
terms of
right.
how many teams are feeding into it. It benefits the ACC for this thing to drag on, and that's just an objective truth. Trust me, I don't think it's smart that there were people screaming at us in the comments saying, "Oh, it's all going to be over by June 30th." But I understand why they wanted that, because if something so drastic as this case coming to a complete stop by June 30th were to happen, in 99% of worlds, that means something has gone terribly wrong for the ACC. Because if the chances of those teams dropping out by then, slim to none, doesn't make sense. Chances of ACC dropping out by then, again, slim to none, doesn't make sense. But at least from the ACC standpoint, you could see them saying, okay, something new has come up that's made us withdraw. You wouldn't necessarily see that with Clemson or FSU. But the reality is, again, this is not Suits. We do not have Harvey Specter. Okay? This is not Perry Mason. We are not seeing that moment where he gets you to admit to doing the killing in court. It's not going to happen. What we are going to see here, my prediction on this thing is at least another year to year and a half of back and forth in court, back and forth in this court. This side wins this court case. Well, now we got to do this court case. Now we got to elevate these cases because this side won this case and this side won this case, and we need to, what jurisdiction is truly the jurisdiction that they have to follow, and all that type of stuff. And that's why I said if there was a settlement, the teams definitely make out the better, because then they can go and get the higher paydays from the other conferences right away if they just pay out whatever and go, as opposed to the ACC, who is now, they're unwhole because these two teams are gone for the payout. So, this is, again, when you ask why are you fighting tooth and nail, just imagine if somebody was holding your head underwater. How hard would you fight? Because that's what the ACC is facing. That's what the ACC is facing. If you let these two out scot-free, you really are done, because the ACC and ESPN already don't have a great relationship. It is already being speculated that ESPN and company are done with the ACC. And so if that happens, where do you go next? Where do you go next as a conference? That becomes the big question to ask there. And when you come to that conclusion, you come to understand that this isn't a fight for just a few ducats or a few dollars to bolster to bolster our piggy bank. This is about, can we pay the mortgage? Can we keep the lights on? Will we exist? That's what that's about.
Well said. Well, we're going to get into the weeds in football when we come back. Here's kind of an ominous quote from Josh Pate of 24/7 Sports, who said, "I'm not overstating this. It will be the wildest transfer portal era that you've ever seen, and it's going to completely gut some of your teams. Transfer portal is opening again in just a few days." We'll talk about who the ACC can't afford to lose and what some of the top ACC teams need to go after when they go portal shopping on April 15th. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. And folks, I'm only getting started with Game Time. Buying last-minute tickets, used to be a stressful experience, but I know on the Game Time app, I'm getting the best possible deals, and the deals actually get better the closer you get to an event. You can even, in some cases, buy tickets to a sporting event an hour after that event has already started, which is awesome. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which means getting tickets is even faster and easier now. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Guys, I have gotten Marlins tickets for so cheap on Game Time. That's like, I feel guilty. Like, I feel like, although I feel less guilty when I realize how poorly the team's been playing. I've gotten Miami Heat tickets at great deals, Florida Panthers tickets at great deals, tickets to Hamilton, musical theater, comedy. They have everything on the Game Time app. Guys, I love the all-in pricing. They show you the total upfront, no surprise fees at checkout, which is great. The seat views are key. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And they have the lowest price guarantee. It's called the Game Time Guarantee. They will credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same section or row for less. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. Kenton, there is a flip side to that Josh Pate quote where he said, it's going to completely gut some of your teams, this upcoming transfer portal. And first of all, why is this transfer portal going to be different? Because the NCAA can no longer restrict how many times a player transfers. They used to kind of do that, where you get the first time free transfer, and then the second time you have to sit out a year or get a waiver. Some players were successful with the waiver, some players weren't. Now you can just transfer as many times as you want. So it's going to be crazy. Now, he did mention on the flip side, in addition to some of your teams getting gutted, other teams that may not feel like a contender when they go through their spring football games can maybe become a national championship contender if they add certain players. It kind of reminds me, like Kenton, the ACC, Duke already lost Riley Leonard, which is a big loss for them. I can remember a lot of rumors and chatter a year ago. This didn't end up happening, but a lot of people were trying to convince me that Drake May was going to leave North Carolina last year. He loved UNC. He ended up staying for his final year. He's going to be a very high draft pick coming up shortly. Yeah. Are there players you would look at, various teams in the conference? Like I think about, somebody like a Casey Concepcion on your North Carolina State Wolfpack. I think about a guy like Ruben Bain on the Miami Hurricanes, like a player that, teams just cannot afford to lose if this transfer portal really does get crazy.
Well, if you're talking about NC State, I'll talk about a player that was already in the portal at an earlier point in time in the portal cycle this offseason in Aiden White. NC State cannot afford to lose him. He is a premier cover guy. I mean, he is white on rice. He is, he's glue. He sticks to guys, and man, wherever you go, don't worry about it. He's your shadow. He's in your pocket. He's with you. So long as the sun is out, he's going to be following you all day long. And so that young man is one that, if this is truly that crazy of a portal period, I'm not saying that he's given anybody reason to be nervous, but I'm saying that if we are looking at a portal period that is so crazy, it has people shaking in their boots, that may be a name to look out for, because he's a cornerstone of that defense. And again, he has already shown the proclivity to look elsewhere and have a wandering eye a little bit. And speaking of folks who've already had a wandering eye, many pieces on that Florida State defense. You may have similar questions. And you may work under the theory with Aiden and those guys from Florida State. They've already looked out, right? It's like if you and your partner did the opening of your relationship for a bit, and then they got out there and said, "Oh, everybody look a little funny. They don't smell too good out here in the street. They weird. They don't know how to talk to people in the streets no more. What's going on?" And then they come home, and that person is more settled than the person who may not have had that time to look out. You may look at it that way. That's a possibility. But there are plenty of candidates that, I mean, you're talking about guys that are not just starters, all conference performers who have previously looked in the portal, that if they decide to leave now, you are absolutely right. Their teams will be gutted, mortified. You have to replace a top talent like that. You do not have a lot of time to do it. You do not have a lot of options to do it with. Now you're having to do roster reconstruction on a rolling and constant basis, which I'm all for player movement and I'm all for player empowerment. This, I believe, is a step too far. I believe that this portal window should not exist. But if ifs and buts were berries and nuts, squirrels will never starve. And we live in the real world, so we got to get used to the potential of my team, your team, his team, her team, their team, seeing some very bad results out of portal in this spring window.
Something I'm sure we're going to get a few more of these over the next couple days before the portal actually officially opens on April 15th. But there's certain players around the country who are like already kind of quietly announcing their intentions to leave their school, even though they can't officially do that until Monday. I think usually you'll leak that to a media member and he'll put it out there. Honestly, like if I knew I was going to leave on April 15th, I would want to get that word out there early as possible, Kenton, because you think about it, even if like technically, if anyone contacts you before the 15th, they are tampering. But at the same time, even if you take the tampering thing, out of it, because some people just assume it happens and there's not really any way you can stop that. But even if you take the tampering part out of it, aren't there advantages? Like if you declare on Thursday or Friday before Monday that I'm going to hit the transfer portal, at least then teams know, hey, this guy's going to be available. We can put him on our big board and get ready to kind of envision what he would look like on our team and maybe make first contact as soon as the portal opens. Like, I feel like if you're going to leave your team, why not kind of leak that out there early? Because at least it gives teams and intermediaries kind of a jump to say, hey, we need to go out and get this guy. Because I think my biggest nightmare, Kenton, would be is every time a player hits the portal, they just assume my phone's going to be ringing off the hook. Well, when there are literally thousands of players in the transfer portal, some of these guys don't get contacted, or at least not contacted by the teams they're interested in going to. So the portal can be the mean streets of the transfer portal is not what every player thinks it's going to be.
Yeah, and the tampering thing isn't real. I'm sorry to tell y'all, if you get caught tampering in today's world, you're an idiot. Everybody is only 5 to 6 degrees. There was a movie about that, right? What was the movie?
Yeah, 6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation, right? So let's just pretend in this fictional world, Ken's a little bit younger. Okay, I'm a little bit younger, and I play at NC State right now. And I'm like, they're not going to play me behind Brandon Cleveland, but I'm a really good 3-tech. I can really generate some problems, and this 3-3-5 ain't for me, but I'm still stuck here. Well, there's a player that is now leaving Kentucky. He's no longer a part of the program, and his name is Deontay Walker, right? Deontay Walker played at Cass Tech. Where did Ken go to high school at? Cass Tech. Well, now, wait a minute. If I'm Kentucky's coaches, I think I just found a way to reach out and talk to Kenton without tampering.
Bingo. Yep.
Oh, well, that's a very direct correlation, and every school ain't like Cass Tech to where y'all got guys everywhere. That's fine, sure. Let's pretend I know that you went to an All-American camp. Let's say Donno's the guy. Let's say Donno is what high school did you go to? In what city?
Westminster Christian in Miami.
Okay, Westminster Christian. And you were a bad boy at Westminster Christian. There was no corner that could keep up with you. You were white lightning. But Westminster Christian didn't put up with anybody else. They didn't put out anybody else, right? But they know you went to the Army All-American game and you roomed with Bubba over here. Bubba is, he's a personable guy. He's fun. He's lovable. And they go up to him and say, well, how's Donno? Did you? Oh, yeah, I love Donno. Me and Donno chat all the time. We want Donno. He just announced he's hit the portal. Get on the phone. So that's for the tampering part. Now, let's get into the other part of this thing in terms of, how teams can even go forth and go about handling this. That's the interesting part. That's the intriguing part that I just don't know the answer to. I mean, there are so many needs for so many of these teams that you're looking at potentially addressing right away. But then the other end of it, you may have a new need created overnight. If Bane were to leave Miami, not saying that he is.
Yeah, and by the way, I also wanted to say I'm not saying that
No.
would
We're
ever
just using
happen.
that as
It's
an example.
hypothetical. Yeah,
Exactly.
hypothetical.
But like you said, we're talking about players who could not afford to leave. Bane is one of those guys. Peyton at Florida State is one of those guys. Obviously, Kyron Jones and Byshaw too. And if they were to leave there, I'm telling you, you would be looking at some really bad situations. All of those new transfers up to Syracuse, if any of them were to leave, there is instant trouble in paradise vibes of, wait a minute, y'all love Coach Fran. Everybody loves Coach Fran as a recruiter. Why don't y'all like him as a head coach? Why are you leaving? What's going on? Same thing with Boston College. I'll tell you what, Thomas Castellanos can answer somebody's question right away. The biggest question right away. He can go get some money that I know he ain't touching in Chestnut Hill. And even if he is touching that type of money, we just saw with Big Boy from Iowa, Caden Proctor, you can double dip. You can double dip now. You can go get your money from one place, get more money from another place. So there are lots of players in the ACC that they are fundamental building stones of the program that they're at. There are so many guys like that you would just hate to see leave these programs. And so long story short, it's really almost too many to name. But again, when you think about all of these teams, I would say this: if I can walk away with all of my two deep intact on both sides of the ball, I'm happy. I'm happy. If we got to replace our L5 in kickoff coverage, I'm okay with that. What I'm not okay with is having to replace our starting long snapper, our starting left defensive end, our starting running back. Whoa, hold on. That's a little bit different of a story.
Very different. Well, I want to talk about some transfer portal needs from some of the top teams around the conference when we come back. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack with you. Not done yet on Locked On ACC. And I'll never be done with FanDuel. Guys, we've been winning money this basketball season, this hockey season, football season is going to be here before we know it. It's playoff time just about in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. And yeah, guys, there are literally prop bets. You can bet how much a player is going to score, who's going to score first, halftime spreads, all of this on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. Kenton, again, it's not just we talk about players possibly leaving schools in the transfer portal. It's also an opportunity to make upgrades. And, a team that's been the transfer GOAT in the ACC the last couple of years has been the Florida State Seminoles. And, I know that we talked earlier about some of the reports out of there. Spring football is that, you're having to rely on some young receivers to take a leap, and you're trying to replace Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson, which is not an easy task. So I wonder if they may go after, a top, and we don't know who's going to be in the portal next week, but if they may go after another top veteran receiver, because, I went back and double checked the date of when they acquired Keon Coleman last year, and that happened in the later transfer portal. It happened super late. So that was a need that they addressed after their spring game. I wonder if they might do something similar this year. I can definitely speak on Miami. It looks like Miami is going running back shopping because they're not exactly sure. At least I'm not exactly sure when Mark Fletcher is going to be healthy again. I think they might make a run at Damian Martinez, the Oregon State back who rushed for almost 1,200 yards last year, 2,000 yards over the past two seasons, who intends to enter the transfer portal. I also think Miami needs defensive backs. I think that's an area they're going to look at. Anything else you want to add on Flo? I assume Clemson's not taking any transfers because that's not how Dabo does his business. But anything you want to add on some of these teams, and who should NC State be looking at? What positions?
I'll tell you what, in terms of running back shopping for Miami, absolutely. with all due respect to that true freshman from Bishop Gorman, if a tight end is looking like your best ball carrier,
Bingo. Yeah.
unless that young man's name is Jesus Christ, you should probably not be excited about that. And that's no disrespect to the young man. I think that the more I hear about him, the more I'm hearing like he's Brevin Jordan with the super soldier serum, which I'm like, oh, that's a little terrifying for the rest of the country. But still, you don't want your tight end to be your best ball carrier.
I agree.
So going for a running back, especially one of Martinez's caliber, makes sense. That is natural. Now, in terms of the other position needs that you were talking about with Florida State and looking for a big-time receiver, absolutely. Absolutely. We talk about how high DJU's floor is all the time, right? But you know what brings up a quarterback ceiling more than anything else? Get him a star on that outside. Get him a superstar. Oh, get him one of those guys that's like, he down there somewhere. Get him one of those. And watch how those numbers go up. Watch how that confidence goes up. Watch how defenses have to shift their scheme to address that guy, which then does what for everybody else? Opens things up. Now that freshman that's like, he's a pretty good route runner. Well, he's always facing one-on-one coverage. And sometimes teams put out bad matchups and he ends up against a safety or a linebacker because they got to keep an eye on this guy. Going and getting more playmakers absolutely makes sense for Florida State. In terms of NC State, I would probably say linebacker and offensive line depth are the two areas that I would look at most. I'm really sold on their defensive background. I know that a lot of people aren't as high on them as I am, but I'm telling you right now, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know who Brandon Cisse is, by the end of this season, you will. He's special. He's special. And if Aiden White and he are the cornerback duo at NC State, they'll be just fine. In that safety room, last year we were down to safety number 3, and it was still a strength of the team. I don't know how they did it, but they're special. So I'm going to leave that where it is. But the linebacking depth or linebacker really starters. Yeah, I don't want depth pieces that's like, oh, he'll be good in a couple of years. I want somebody that's going to be good right away there. And I'm going to tell you this. Bill O'Brien, I know you like to play with those tight ends and all that. How many good ones do you have in Boston College right now? How many are in Chestnut Hill that you feel confident about right now? You know, and this isn't any disrespect to the tight ends that are there. I just think that he's definitely going to want to add more. Like, that's just something, if you know Bill O'Brien and you watched Bill O'Brien coach teams long enough, they love to go with those multiple tight end sets, and you need a lot of tight ends to do that. Again, that's no disrespect to the tight ends that Boston College already has. And I think that multiple teams are looking at more. I mean, where don't you have needs for Pitt offensively? Where don't you have needs?
Right.
What would you say this group at Pitt is good enough to be an ACC starting unit? Guess what, Narduzzi? If you got problems with the personnel, they've got a thing for you to fix it. I've got just the thing for you. It's called a portal. Go in there and go get some good guys.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And guys, we're going to be talking more, I'm sure, in the coming days about transfer portal because, again, I'm heeding Mr. Pate's warning. This is going to be pure chaos out there. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down that volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Speaking of which, Kenton and I are here every day on Locked On ACC. We will talk to you guys again next time right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.